My name is Zachary Conan. Today we are going to be talking about the character Hannibal Lecter, his many forms and adaptations, but most specifically we're going to be talking about this novel right here, Hannibal by Thomas Harris, which actually turned 20 this summer. So happy 20th birthday to what is my favorite horror novel of all time. It's an annual treat. I reread, I revisit the mad, macabre, absurd, and Looney Tunes world of Thomas Harris's book, Hannibal. Hannibal is a really interesting book in the Hannibal Lecter series, in the mythos. Because it's quite, like I said, it's Looney Tunes. It's quite absurd. And I think it has a few meta-contextual purposes. And Hannibal Lecter, I have to talk about this. I have to talk about this. I mean, Hannibal is one of my favorite villains of all time, but the book Hannibal gives us Mason Verger and Margot Verger. Gives us the Vergers, and Mason in particular is one of my favorite villains of all time. He's grotesque, he's disgusting, he's absurd, he's colorful, he's hilarious, he's awful, filthy, wonderful. A wonderful character. And we'll talk a bit more about him soon. But one of the things that really struck me about this book right here, and about a lot of the adaptations of Hannibal, is one of the few things that all of them have in common is that they pull from Thomas Harris the idea of Hannibal's curiosity, his insatiable, very human curiosity. There's even a line in here that likens Clarice Starling to a butterfly, and Hannibal is kissing this like cocoon of something that is becoming something beyond itself, something larger than itself, all about becoming. And he can aid it along the way, he can nurture it, he can point it in a certain direction, but what it becomes when it finally blossoms and blooms is far beyond Hannibal's control, but he's very interested in becoming. So let's look at that a little meta-contextually. Let's look at that at what Thomas Harris is possibly saying. Now, the 80s and 90s were obsessed, completely obsessed with serial killers. You can make the argument that we still live in a culture that is obsessed with serial killers. But I think Thomas Harris, who is a man very averse, very, who shrinks from fame. He's a very private author for being such a high-profile kind of writer. He shrinks away from fame. And I think that he has a very negative view of fame. And I think that he saw Hannibal Lecter becoming a glorification of the grotesque, of cannibals, of serial killers. He saw it as the eventual and inevitable glorification of this character. So he wrote a book where Hannibal is actually the hero. And you have Mason Verger being the villain of this particular book. So he wrote a book where Hannibal is not only a hero, he's a superhero. He is nearly untouchable. And I think that he saw the 90s craze about serial killers. And Thomas Harris, I think, felt largely responsible for this, like, hyper-attention, this hyper-focus, this hyper-obsession that at least American culture had surrounding the likes of Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy and Ed Gein in that time period. And I think that's him saying, with Hannibal Lecter's character, I can aid it along, I can create this character, I can create this idea, I can explore these themes of becoming, almost Nietzsche-esque themes of gazing into an abyss, of becoming monsters. But what happens after that, I have no control over. And Hannibal has become a bit of an anti-hero, and largely because of this book right here. Because Hannibal, spoilers for the novel, not for the film, Ridley Scott did not follow this. Hannibal and Clarice Starling end up together. They end up as lovers. They end up happily in love. Another fascinating thing about Hannibal in this book is that Hannibal is, he was obsessed with Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, and a theory that Stephen Hawking used to hold, that should the universe eventually stop expanding and contract and become smaller, time itself will reverse, and teacups that are broken on the floor will put themselves back together again upon the coffee table. And This is Hannibal's raison d'etre. This is Hannibal's driving poetic force. He had a younger sister named Misha who was murdered and eaten by German soldiers during an occupation of Lithuania. And I'm a Lithuanian Jew. I kind of love Hannibal. But he's trying to find Misha in Clarice Starling. He wishes that his life would come back together. And if there is a symbol of a completely broken, Humpty Dumpty, anarchic and nihilistic and cruel and grotesque, it is Mason Verger. You do not want the past to put itself back together again. But Hannibal Lecter, that's his modus operandi for most of this novel. And it's very interesting because Thomas Harris also puts in some very anti-capitalist ideas. We can say that there are three different characters trying to capture Hannibal Lecter in here. Actually, let's say four. There's Clarice Starling, who we know and who we love, and her heroics are incredible. Has wonderful lines like, "The world will not be this way within reach of my arm." She is an existentialist hero. She believes that as much as she can, she will form her own reality, and within her sphere, within the reach of her arm, justice will mean something. Yet Hannibal, the novel, Thomas Harris shows us that she is becoming alienated from her workplace, alienated from the concept of justice, alienated by the politics of the FBI. We get the second character who is also trying to capture Lecter, and that is Paul Krendler, who I thought was played remarkably well by Ray Liotta in the film by Ridley Scott. One of the truly great things about it was Ray Liotta's performance. And he is someone who is completely driven by selfish qualities. Someone who loves the politics of the FBI, someone who does not care about justice, someone who does not care about righteousness, someone who has no moral compass outside of capitalist or capital gain, really, and gain of status. And that's why he is trying to capture Hannibal Lecter for the Vergers. And Mason Verger is the ultimate divine capitalist. He's a meat-packing prince. He's the son of a meat-packing dynasty, and it's cruel, and it's awful, and it's about how capitalism cannibalizes itself, which is a theme I've talked about on this channel several times. He is the ultimate grotesque, horrifying ideal of capitalism cannibalizing itself, because he did cannibalize himself. Because under hallucinogenics, while he was jerking himself off to autoerotic asphyxiation, he was cutting off his own face, and he and Hannibal were feeding it to the dogs. He ate his own nose. He is a pedophile. He is a rapist, incestual rapist. He's a killer. He is obsessed with torture, he drinks cocktails that are made up of children's tears. He is the worst possible person on the planet, and he is afforded all of this luxury by being so rich, by being such a divine capitalist. And the fourth person who is after Hannibal Lecter is Rinaldo Pazzi. There's quite a bit of this novel that takes place in Florence, and I think Thomas Harris writes about Florence wonderfully. In fact, he's the only reason why I want to visit that city. It seems to have such a great Gothic atmospheric to it that I want to visit it so badly. But Rinaldo Pazzi is wonderful. He may be one of the greatest absurd heroes in all of literature. An absurd hero has to be inevitably doomed. Pazzi of the ancient Pazzi returns to his ancient city with his aims as old as time. You know from the very first line of Pazzi's introduction that he is going to be murdered in the most tragicomic way possible. And he's also trying to find Hannibal for capital gain as well. So they're all being alienated by their idea of justice by money, except for Clarice Starling. Clarice Starling is alienated from the concept of justice because of the way that the bureaucratization of justice. So her alienation is far more in line with a Karl Marx sort of alienation. And that is something that Hannibal Lecter is able to try to tap into. And Thomas Harris is saying in this book that alienation is irreversible. That it's not going to change, and that's why they end up together. Hannibal helps her through all of these problems in herself, and helps her to see the world in a way that isn't darkened by politics, isn't darkened by the false dichotomy of morality. And that might be something that Thomas Harris is trying to express to his readers as well. That he knows his readers don't actually want to see Hannibal punished, Hannibal killed. They want to see Hannibal eat people. And Thomas Harris isn't very much interested in that notion. Thomas Harris is interested in exposing to you the alienation of your own life, and that Hannibal Lecter is an antidote to it. But you can only learn so much and live. So you can only gaze into the abyss so long and keep your sanity. That is how Hannibal ends. The final line of the novel is, you can only learn so much and live. In this book, he gives you what the audience wants. But what the audience wants, the audience doesn't like to get, actually. That's why this book was criticized so heavily, and why Ridley Scott, in the film version of the book, didn't follow the idea that Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter love each other and end up together madly in love in Argentina, in wonderful evening gowns, watching a opulent opera. They don't like that idea. That's what they secretly want. That is the end result of the glorification of the serial killer, of the mad cannibal. That's what they secretly want, but they don't want to get it because they want to be told that that sort of impulse, that sort of passion, that sort of drive, that sort of attraction is wrong. And Thomas Harris is not here to tell you that. And that's why this book is so incredibly horrifying, because it taps into it. So, I mean, after Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs, he's had you gaze into the abyss, and you're coming back for more. So you're already completely romantic with the idea of monsters, if not completely fantasizing, not about killing, obviously, but about those darker qualities of yourself that you might be able to possess, that you might be able to express. So Hannibal is giving you the ultimate true crime love story, that you actually fall in love with your ideal of a serial killer. And it's not Stockholm Syndrome, it's something completely different, and I don't think they have a name for. It's about how 90s culture was so obsessed with serial killers, specifically thanks to the Hannibal Lecter's popularity in the 90s. And Thomas Harris is giving you a kiss from the devil. Better the devil you know, right? And you haven't gotten to know the devil. It's such a fantastic and wonderful book. And to speak briefly, since this is a film channel, about the different versions of Hannibal. I mean, we've had Brian Cox, Anthony Hopkins, and Mads Mikkelsen, just to name three. I think Mads Mikkelsen does the best job at Hannibal. I think he is the best Hannibal. Of course, he's the one from the television show that was canceled way before its time. That's a remarkable adaptation of that really kind of embraces what I'm talking about, this insane universe, this of nearly superheroics, of gothic superheroics that Thomas Harris built throughout 4 different novels. It really embraces this universe, embraces the mythology, and is very shameless about it. And Mads Mikkelsen, I think, has the correct amount of pathos, the correct amount of humanity to really bring his portrayal of Lecter into the ether of Legends. I think that that's one of the finer performances I've seen in the 2010s, is Hannibal Lecter by Mads Mikkelsen. If you know the channel at all, you know that Manhunter is one of my favorite movies of all time, and that has very little to do with Brian Cox's interpretation of the character, which I thought was wonderful. I still thought it was great. I think that's the least attractive version of Lecter, so depending on where you stand on the glorification of the macabre, of the sadistic, then maybe you would like Brian Cox's interpretation the best, because he does not make you want to know more. Manhunter is a brilliant film because of Michael Mann's direction, and also William Peterson as Will Graham is one of the best performances of the 80s, hands down. Amazing performance. Anthony Hopkins is the stuff of legend. But it's the stuff of B-movie legend. Jonathan Demme wanted to make a B-movie with The Silence of the Lambs, and it comes across very much like a B-movie with Hitchcock theatrics, and that's really what separates it and helps it become the kind of culty classic that it is, and it's totally deserving of that status. It's just that Hopkins doesn't exactly have what I would call the necessary amount of romantic charisma. I mean, when the film Silence of the Lambs was made, this book had not yet been written, so maybe there was no way of knowing that the romanticist qualities needed to be imbibed within that character when Jonathan Demme was making the film, nor do I think that would have happened anyway. I think Silence of the Lambs is wonderful, but then I do believe Anthony Hopkins is a bit boring in the film Hannibal, and Red Dragon, the film by Brett Ratner. I mean, I shouldn't even have to say anymore. It is kind of soulless. It is lifeless. It's a bit bad. It's very bad. I think Ralph Fiennes is very good as Francis Dolarhyde in that film. Harvey Keitel as Jack Crawford's very good, but not as good as Lawrence Fishburne in the television show. Lawrence Fishburne also wows me as an actor. The older that he gets, it's very interesting. He's kind of nuanced, and a lot of people don't really recognize that. But Mads Mikkelsen is the best live-action Hannibal that we've gotten, but nothing compares to the version that Thomas Harris puts on the page, because the version that Thomas Harris puts on the page is meant to shame his readers in this book. Only in this book. It's meant to shame his readers, because in The Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon, Hannibal Lecter was meant to penetrate his readers, was meant to violate his readers psychologically and philosophically, emotionally, was meant to sway you in a certain kind of direction, in the direction of the abyss. He was trying to get you to a point where he could drown you with cold, hard sadism, with truth, with a cannibalistic sort of awakening, or becoming, to really use the vocabulary of Thomas Harris. And Hannibal itself, he knows that Hannibal already has you in the palm of his hand. This is what happens. This novel is what happens after you enter the abyss. This novel is what happens after you've gladly drowned in the abyss of monsters. This is the inevitability of curiosity turned into complete obsession. This is him shaming his readers into accepting that what they want to do is not catch Hannibal, what they want to do is fuck him. They want Hannibal to change their lives. The symbol of Hannibal, the symbol of hatred. They want an icon of doom, an icon of violence to come into their life and fundamentally change it, help it, and repair it. Or completely doom it, completely keep it in a fog of some sort of hypnotic, demonic glee. That's what the readers and the viewers and those who are obsessed with true crime or serial killer films, which I am from time to time, it's a kick that I go on, and it's one that I don't feel particularly happy about, which is why there haven't been too many videos on here, because it's hard to do without glorification. So I love this book because I can talk about it as a meta-contextual way, because this is about the inevitability of that glorification and where it will lead you to, and also it's completely accepting the idea that it's impossible not to glorify the characters. Not to glorify a character like Hannibal Lecter. It's impossible not to when you write him so well and he penetrates you so deeply. And Thomas Harris might also be admitting failure, because you weren't supposed to be so fascinated by him in Red Dragon, in Silence of the Lambs. But you were, because the character was stronger than the architect. And this here is the architect building his most wonderful cathedral, his most intense memory palace, to hold you in Hannibal's arms, to feel his kiss on your cheek, to feel his lips to your breast. That is what this book is, and that is why it is so intensely scary. Because Clarice Starling is one of the greatest heroes ever written about, and this is the ultimate deconstruction of that hero. Ultimate deconstruction. She becomes the new mother, the new sister, the new woman of Hannibal Lecter's life. Feeds him from her breast. Breastfeeds him. Nurses him to health. Shows him that time will never contract, time will never reverse, and you should never want it to. And as Thomas Harris saying, this obsession with serial killers is irreversible. That we've gone so far in one specific direction that we have to accept the romantic outcomes. And we have to kiss the devil on the lips. And we have to keep kissing him. And we have to make him afraid, should we ever eventually depart. Yeah. I love this novel. I read it every year. It's fascinating. It is completely fascinating. If you want nightmares, Mason Verger, as a kid, I watched Hannibal for the very first time. Gary Oldman played Mason Verger there. And also, Julianne Moore played Clarice Starling in that film. I think very underrated performance. Not a great one, but an underrated one, to say the least. But Gary Oldman played Mason Verger in the film, and I remember he gave me nightmares. And I got like this audiobook on tape when I was like 10 years old, you know. And the parts of Mason Verger gave me actual, literal nightmares. And that's one of the best things if you're a true horror fan like I am. Actual, literal nightmares, night terrors that you wake up and you're like, because I was a child, I didn't want to be violated by Mason Verger, talked into poisoning my pets. This is insanity. Insanity. Big shout out to Michael Pitt for playing him on the television show. Although we only played him for 3 episodes, Michael Pitt's a phenomenal actor. I fell in love with him with his portrayal of Jimmy on Boardwalk Empire, and seeing him play Mason Verger on the television show, which if you haven't seen, you definitely should, was incredible. It's probably the best interpretation I will ever see of that character, hands down. And Mads, seeing those two in a room together, acting off each other in a completely different style with energy, it completely complements each other in the most gothic way possible, in a very humorous way and disturbing way as well. And that's the best kind of disturbing, is the ones that make you laugh because you are uncomfortable, and because you find yourself relating to characters in a room, and both characters are sadistic, but just like Thomas Harris does in the novel, if your only point of view in that particular part is someone who is either doomed like Ronaldo Pazzi, or someone who is unforgivably demented like Mason Verger, you're forced to identify with a certain aspect of him, a certain characteristic, trait, or quality. You're forced to see yourself in them. But Thomas Harris knows that you like doing that. Hence the purposes of Hannibal Lecter, hence the purposes of the novel Hannibal. It's an incredible book. It's an incredible book, incredible character that really makes you think. In the comments below, what do you think of Hannibal Lecter? Who was your favorite live-action Hannibal? What's your favorite live-action film of Hannibal? Or if you're like me, if you're a super fan, what's your favorite book by Thomas Harris about Hannibal Lecter? You can rank them. There's only 4, so it's not like there's a whole lot. For me, it's the book Hannibal, the book Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, and then Hannibal Rising. There's a lot of bullshit around the production, around the writing of Hannibal Rising that kind of makes it fall down near the bottom, but you can tell that Thomas Harris is still invested in it in some specific way, even though he's basically forced to write it by contractual obligations. There's still a very large quotient of humanity in Hannibal Rising, the book, as well. But this one right here, this is outrageously good. It's outrageously good. And Clarice Starling is the answer to Samson's riddle. She is the honey and the lion. The answer to Samson's riddle, the honey and the lion. She is the woman, the obsession of the sadistics. She should be all of our obsession. Our obsession should be focused on Clarice Starling, not necessarily our point of view. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching this video. It has gone on long enough. I really appreciate you watching. Please like the video, and please comment, share this video around. What YouTube likes more than anything else is audience engagement. So show YouTube that I kind of know how to engage with you guys. I'm really appreciative of you guys, but I know how to engage with you as well. At least show YouTube that. Show your love for Hannibal Lecter, even though it's a shameful love. I believe in the end we shouldn't be ashamed of it, because we've been romanced into it, and now it's more than obsession. It's an affair. It's an affair with the cannibalistic, sadistic qualities that we know in our hearts that we possess, about the abyss inside of our spirits that we've already gazed into, that we've long gazed into, but we're now drowning in. Thank you so much for watching.